For Western whites, Africa has always represented a place in which to hoard their darkest myths. No continent has seemed so alien. The relationship between Westerners and Africa has been superficial and conflict-filled, rarely characterized by integration, equality, or respect. Whether as tourists, cooperators, engineers, or colonizers, the white man in Africa, even today, inhabits islands which protect and separate him from a world he doesn't understand.
We have the two flags of the Netherlands. This is the Prince's flag, Prince Willem van Orania. Those two flags was used in the Cape when Jan van Riebeeck arrived. And then we have the old Voortrekker flag, when they left the Cape as voortrekkers in order to establish a new community, a free community here in the northern.
Orania is a newly founded city whose developers are trying to create an independent Afrikaner state based on the laws of apartheid. It is located next to the Orania River in the heart of the South African desert. From an old village in ruins, the new pioneers have created the necessary infrastructure to plant the seed of what they intend to be the independent state of Orania. 600 people currently live here.
We realized that we need an area big enough to accommodate at least 300 to a half million, 300,000 to a half million to perhaps 1 million Afrikaners. They can have a homeland for themselves. Our idea was to start here at the northern part with the Orange River as natural source and to work down to the west coast.
The first whites to emigrate to South Africa with the intention of staying were the Dutch Boers. These were Protestant peasant families who came via the Cape of Good Hope at the end of the 17th century. They were joined by some Germans and French, rough people with deeply held Puritan convictions who did not accept the colonial authority of the English. They emigrated to the north, coming into conflict with the Zulu tribes and British troops, created 2 independent states, and were finally defeated by the British colonial power.
We decide here in Orania to put up what we call a freedom flag. And that is the old Netherlands flag with orange there, not red as the Transvaal, with orange there and the green there. So this is the flag here in Orania.
With the creation of the Union of South Africa, and later with independence in 1961, some of the Boers' interests were recognized. Afrikaans, their language, was made official, and with the complicity of the other white South Africans, they established a state based on apartheid, on racial segregation. In 1994, the first democratic elections in South Africa gave power to the black majority, and apartheid was abolished.
I'm an Afrikaner and I identify with the people in Orania. There was a positive energy in Orania which I liked In the rest of South Africa, everybody seemed to be a bit in a depression, or the Afrikaners especially, after what happened in the country.
Christian, like many other young Afrikaners, left everything to start a new life in Orania. He lived in Pretoria, where he ran a successful architectural firm. He hopes to build mud and straw houses like his in Orania.
There's a lot of wheat growing in the area, farmers growing crops, and they just burn all the agricultural waste. In this country, there could be millions of houses could be built with straw they burn each year. It's a very good material to build with in this area. The climate is very harsh, almost like a desert climate, and at night it cools down, and in winter it's very cold.
The reason why we nonetheless are working for a Volksstaat is that it doesn't help us to be a minority of less than 10% in another state, even if it is a democratic state. You are permanently marginalized as such a small minority, and that is why we are establishing our own institutions and state.
Coral Boshoff is one of the children of the developer of the Orania project and also one of its young ideologists.
At the moment, the Afrikaner nation is not a free nation, but in our history, freedom has played a very important role. And in future, it will still. We have a vote, but we have no say on our own affairs. We cannot have freedom without the territory. The two pillars on which our whole history rests is the belief in Christ and God, and the strive for freedom.
Apartheid is something that we have in ourselves, because we go to different clubs, we go to different churches, we don't want to go with somebody else. So apartheid it was created a rude thing, but it is a natural thing amongst people.
It is now awakening, genetic, in these people that are the people that came out of the Boer folk, knowing that we are something else. And we do have a history, and we do have our places, our states.
We lost our independence in 1902, and we want our independence back. We can't survive in South Africa under the present circumstances. The Boer republics belong to the Boers.
Radical Afrikaners are a minority within the political and social framework of the new South Africa, but a noisy minority who are prepared to do anything to recover certain privileges which they consider historic. Pretoria is the administrative capital of South Africa and the symbolic heart of the Afrikaner movement. From here, the rich deposits of gold and diamonds that justified colonization are controlled. And here is where the white oligarchs who designed the system of apartheid settled.
We wish to develop an area for Afrikaners in cooperation with the government of South Africa, that development for the blacks will be on the other side of the river, but we cannot allow a new influx of thousands of blacks in this area. Then we change it back to the old South Africa. And therefore we prefer to develop this as in Afrikaner land.
And on the other hand, what we never should forget, they stand on their platforms, they shouting, "Kille boer, kille farmer."
Will we use arms? Will we resort to an armed struggle? Of course.
Each one of the Central European peasant families that arrived on the South African coast in the 17th century brought with them two indispensable objects, a rifle and a Bible. The Bible is still a fixture on the bedside table of the descendants of those Boer pioneers. The New Testament is, in Orania, something more than a holy book. It is the guide that determines the duties and principles of its citizens.
We give a very high priority to education because your quality, the quality of your work, the quality of your input in South Africa and in the rest of Africa and in our own work for self-determination depends on what we know.
Each year, on the 10th of October, the community celebrates the anniversary of President Kruger's death. Each member prepares his or her own choreography and song.
And I just think that perhaps Afrikaners as a minority group feel that perhaps, they feel that they want to be free, they want to establish their own country where they are a majority and where they can establish their own policy and handle crime their own way.
Binding as a nation, we're starting from scratch and building a nation amongst our own. We're not, we sort of get rid of all the previous things that went wrong in the country.
I'm sticking with you, 'cause I'm made out of glue.
Enige ding saam doen.
Orania is for us young people a safe place where there's no crime. Apartheid started out well, but it ended badly. It's not the fault of us young people. We only want to promote our culture and our religion.
You can look at any other country in this world. Now two cultures can mix together and come together as one.
My dream for the future is to become a fighter pilot. Probably be a mercenary or something.
Towards Afrikaners, we want to have the first prize. We want to have a country which Afrikaans, our language, is the prime language.
The future of South Africa, that's a hard one. I mean, so many things changed over the past few years. It's unpredictable. Can't say what's going to happen. So you just sit back and wait for it.
The missionaries were, together with explorers and traders, the first white men to venture into the interior of the African continent. And there they still are, each year older and less numerous. In recent decades, with the proliferation of NGOs, another figure has arisen which does not replace the missionaries, but complements them, that of the cooperator. He or she is generally a young Westerner between the ages of 20 and 35, with a university education and high ideals. Olga Thaola was born in France and grew up in Gabon and Spain. She later returned to Africa to take part in a cooperation project.
I grew up here, well, not here in Gabon, in another country. I visited other countries in Africa and was educated in Europe. I suppose that in some way Africa was always on my mind, or I always had a memory of my childhood. And that's what drove me to return. Yardeme is an association that takes in single mothers, that takes charge of educating them. It's not a purely charitable organization in that we don't just try to help and that's that, but we educate women so that they, once outside the association, can be self-sufficient, have a profession, earn money, learn something about health, education, with a view to educating those children without a father or whose fathers don't take care of them.
What I had imagined of Africa, and it wasn't until I came here that I realised I had this picture, but it was very much one of the place and the geography and not of the people. And to some extent, after being in Uganda for a year and a half, when I think of Africa now, I think of the people and not the geography.
I came to Africa because I think I'd always had the interest since I was a child. My grandfather was from Sierra Leone and he trained as a doctor in Scotland. So as a child, they spent most of their working life in West Africa. Got all these interesting letters about what they were doing and the wildlife and just the adventures that my grandmother, who was Scottish, was having. So
I just thought it would be a very underdeveloped country with, very little means. I didn't expect the sort of triumph and happiness there is in the country. I didn't expect that. I mean, that really enlightened what I thought of the country, because it's amazing. They've got so much spirit and so much community spirit as well.
This guy to look a bit more this way. Vivir en África, por ejemplo.
Living in Africa, for example, I have traveled to 20 African countries, maybe more. I haven't counted them. I've traveled to Latin America. I've traveled to Australia, Europe. At one time, I thought about starting to run safaris in Chile, for example. And we went there. Chile's a lovely country, but I missed the sound of the hyenas at night when we camped out. I missed the songs of the Maasai in nearby settlements.
Faltaban los cantos de los Masáis en los poblados cercanos.
Africa, and it's Africa.
Okay.
Andrés Bifani is Chilean, although he has lived his entire life in Africa. He currently works as a photographer and television cameraman for various Western agencies and production companies who hire his services as a freelancer. He has covered several of the wars and catastrophes that have struck Africa in recent years, especially the war in the Sudan, the longest-running armed conflict on the continent.
Sudan fue una historia divertida.
Sudan was a funny or tragic story. I don't know which would be the best word.
Me llamaron para ir a sacar
They called me to go and film a report on human rights in southern Sudan.
de derechos humanos, sobre los derechos humanos en el sur de Sudán. Despegamos temprano en la mañana.
We took off early in the morning, and it's a 2, almost 3-hour flight.
Empezamos a volar bajo.
We started flying low,
Y se veían aldeas y
and you could see
pueblos.
hamlets and villages,
Y era curioso,
and it was
no se
strange.
veía
You couldn't see any
gente,
people. It was
era
deserted.
ya muy desierto. Una vez que aterrizamos,
Once we had landed,
caminamos unos 20 minutos y llegamos
we
a la
walked some
primera
20
aldea
minutes
que había sido bombardeada
and arrived at
el
the
día
first
anterior.
village, which had been
Había
bombed
matado
the
dos
previous
niñas
day.
de 7, 8, 9
They had
años.
killed 2 7, 8, or
La
9-year-old
gente se
girls.
había ido, quedaban
The people had
algunos
left.
viejos, algunas mujeres.
There were some old people, some women.
Todo se sentía la tensión,
You could feel the
el
tension,
miedo, la angustia.
the fear, the distress.
Estuvimos ahí un poco, se veían los cráteres de las
We
bombas.
stayed there a bit.
Antonov.
You could see the craters from the Antonov bombs, and continued walking.
A la media hora o una hora,
After half an hour or an hour,
la gente empezó a decir Antonov, Antonov.
people began saying Antonov, Antonov. And I said, Antonov what?
Empezaron a caer las bombas.
And after just a bit, bombs began to fall in the distance.
Yo claro me asusté, pero ¿a dónde
Of course,
se
I
esconde
was
uno?
afraid, but where do you hide?
Potrero abierto y
It's totally
no hay
open.
dónde
There's
ir.
nowhere to go.
Y yo estaba con una periodista
I was with an
inglesa
English
y ella
journalist, and she
dice,
said, Antonov.
Antonov. Y yo digo, sí, ¿qué
And I said to her,
hacemos?
yeah,
¿Dónde
what
nos
should we
escondemos? Y dice,
do?
"No, tú
Where
estás
should we
aquí
hide?"
filmar."
And she said, no, you wait here and
La
film.
filmadora.
I took out the camera and began to film.
Empecé como fotógrafo sacando fotos.
I began as a photographer taking photos here. Then I went to an audiovisual school in Paris, and from there I returned here to Kenya. I work with advertising agencies doing television spots and press campaigns. I also have a modeling agency, African Model.
También tengo una agencia de modelos, African Model.
Between wars, Andrés works as a fashion photographer. He himself runs a modeling agency whose goal is to discover new African faces for the European catwalks.
¿Cómo buscamos modelos nuevos? Bueno,
How do we
eso
look for new models?
cambia.
Well, that
Si ves
changes.
una niña bonita
If you
en
see a
un
pretty
bar,
girl
le
in a
vas
bar,
decir,
you're going to tell her to stop by the
pasa por la
agency.
agencia. Depende de lo
It
que el
depends on what the
cliente
client asks for.
nos pida.
Depending on that, we go out, we go to discos, to bars. There's no set rule. It's a little like a wild casting.
I would say it's pretty difficult in Africa to model, and this is because the jobs don't pay as well as overseas, and basically models end up being used and exploited a lot, and they get paid peanuts.
We always insist that if they have another job, that they keep that job. If they're students, that they keep studying, and not count on regular work as a model.
In Africa, it is more like a side job. It is difficult to model in Africa because you have to have the correct body measurements, a flawless skin, and a specific height, and also to get the correct agency so that you get enough commercials to do to keep you.
The market in Nairobi is small, it's tiny, it's completely saturated. A model who does a campaign for an alcoholic beverage isn't going to be able to do other campaigns. So she gets tired and leaves. That's why we're always looking for new models. Most models would like to go and work in Europe or the United States, outside Kenya. So it's very difficult to keep them here once they've done a big campaign. It's a good life, I think. In Nairobi, people live well. Nairobi isn't a very attractive city. The good thing about being here is that you can leave Nairobi often. Every weekend, go to national parks, to Masai Mara, Amboseli, Mount Kenya, or the Outer Dares. A half hour from Nairobi and you're already out. For example, to the south, toward the Ngong Hills, you're already on the open plain, on the road to Masai Mara, for example, to see the migration of the gnus. When hunting was allowed in Kenya, everything was divided into different areas. A hunter had a concession, a hunting area. The landowners earned an income from the hunters. The government earned the money from the license to kill an elephant, or a lion, or a buffalo, or whatever. But the good thing about it was that the hunters took care of their areas. They knew what animals they could and could not kill. They had quotas that they respected. When hunting was banned, these hunters were left without jobs. They began working as tour operators, doing photography safaris. And what happened then? All the landowners started setting up ranches with cattle, or wheat, or corn, or whatever. And they didn't want any more elephants, or buffalo, or baboons on their land. And they started pushing them onto their neighbor's land, or killing them. The policy used to be to leave everything open, that the animals could move from one place to another. Today it's about putting up fences and electricity around private reserves or parks to protect the animals, whose population continues to decrease all the time. Every August we go to Masai Mara to camp and watch the wildebeest migration. More than 1.5 million wildebeest in a constant movement between southern Tanzania, the Serengeti, and Masai Mara in Kenya. It's a truly amazing spectacle.
Bastante impresionante. De un país a otro, la condición de la mujer.
The situation of women varies from country to country in Africa. In Kenya, for example, even now, it is the woman who does everything. Builds the house, looks for firewood or water, does all the work. The men drink beer, spend the women's money. It is the woman who works the land, who goes to market. It's the woman who makes the food, who starts the fire. But this is changing a little bit in Kenya.
Yo pienso que ahora estamos viendo.
I think that now, seeing the last herds, the last wild spaces remaining in Africa, that this is going to disappear in the next 20 years or so. They're going to be closed parks where you'll go in, a little like Jurassic Park to see dinosaurs. We're going to come to see elephants.
A survey taken in the year 2000 among young Americans and Europeans showed that for 80% of them, the word Africa was associated with the idea of death, darkness, and the fear of the unknown. Despite the fact that there are no more blank spaces on our maps, for Western whites, Africa continues to represent a space for fantasy and the romanticism of great expeditions, a land reserved for the true adventurers.
In 1995, we gathered some rafts and we came to Reki, the Nile River. We got here on the 7th of July. We took some rafts down from the source of the Nile. First ones to scout the river, and it was very viable for commercial rafting. So from there, we set up a company called Nile River Explorers.
Fantastic commercial rafting here, which perhaps may be threatened by the building of the new dam. But as far as kayaking goes, this is potentially one of the best rivers in the world. It's warm, it's got everything you could possibly want. There's perfect play waves, there's good people, there's cool beer.
A lot of us to do with lifestyle, and also we're quite adventurous at nature. By nature, the guys who work for us, so you always try and find your piece of paradise. And we found it on the Nile.
paradise and hell. This is what we try to find in Africa, the continent that satisfies our mythological expectations. And another of our myths is that of the noble savage. The Maasai of Kenya well know how to take advantage of this need. Each day they receive hundreds of visitors, before whom they perform a folkloric pantomime of their culture. Everybody wins. The Maasai get paid, and the tourists get the dose of exoticism their trip requires. But appearances are deceiving. We're not so adventurous as we would like to believe. Africa is the least visited continent on the planet. Of the 600 million tourists who traveled during 2002, only 28 million chose Africa as a destination. And of these 28 million, 98% traveled along conventional routes to overcrowded destinations such as Kenya or Egypt. How many times have we seen these images of the great herds of wildebeest and zebras crossing the Mara River during their annual migrations? This is how the scene is experienced in real life.
I think it's my inner strength that allows me to live here. Many women can't manage. Here there are no white women. Some Ghanaians went to the Soviet Union to study and married Russian women to get out of the country. But those women couldn't live here. It's very difficult.
Dora Souza came to the Bijagos Islands in 1994. She came with her husband and 2 daughters with the intention of settling. They started a small hotel and restaurant to serve the few tourists who traveled there. The Bijagos Islands are some 70 miles from the coast of Guinea. There is hardly any public transport, and of the close to 50 islands in the archipelago, only a few are inhabited by tribes in a society organized completely independently, and where tradition prevails in social relations. People live mainly from the sea.
I see the girls working. They're the ones who run the house, who earn for the boys. They're the ones who do everything, because the men don't do anything.
Gloria and Susana are Dora's daughters. They grew up in Africa. They don't have other white girls around them. Their games, their school, their stimuli, and their dreams are marked by a world very different from the one they come from.
When we were in school, we got up and went to school. We came home in the afternoon and helped in the bar or went to the beach, depending on the day. When it's high tide, we go to the beach with our friends. When the tide isn't good, we stay home and help our mother. That's how we spend our days here.
Em certas coisas é diferente, não no geral.
In some things we're different, not in general, but we do have different ways of thinking. For example, I like calm places, and they prefer places where they can have fun, like discos. Others prefer to travel. I don't like dancing, going to discos, because it's all confused. I prefer to read a book, listen to music, stay home.
Sempre vou à praia, ajudo a minha mãe.
I like Boubaké because it's relaxed, pretty.
Às vezes dou passeio.
I always go to the beach with my sister. Sometimes I take a book, sometimes I take a walk. I like peace.
Tem muita paz.
Women are the true political and social driving force on the Bijagos Islands. In addition to controlling the institutions of power, they are the owners of the land they work and act with a great deal of independence in relationships and sexual matters.
When there's a problem between men and women, the older women in the village meet and discuss the problem. They seek out the men, make them meet, and force them to respect the women. It's difficult to see a Bijago woman with a man for many years. They aren't with them for more than 2 or 3 years. Then they look for another. They're the center of the family. The men depend on the women because they don't work. They drink a lot and can't work. When they do work, it's 1 day a week to buy liquor, not to support the household. The women like living like this, free. In their culture, they have the freedom to live with 2, 3, or as many men as they want. Their families don't say anything, or get pregnant at 15. It's not a hindrance. For them, it's good. Here on the island, there are a lot of women who aren't Bijago, and they see the Bijago women get rid of their husbands, and they do the same to live a free life.
During the war, Dora went to Portugal with her daughters, and when she came back, she found her husband living with a Guinean girl. The locals accused the husband's girlfriend of having cast a spell on the Portuguese man and put themselves firmly on Dora's side. One of the most important institutions on the islands is that of the queens. There is a king who concerns himself with men's matters and a woman who works with the women. But these queens are not the wives of the king. They hold an independent post.
I remember clearly the day Dora came to tell us about her problem. We didn't hesitate. We threw that man out of here. We already have enough with our own men to put up with, for a white man to come and bother us. The men have nothing to complain about. They spend the day drinking and talking amongst themselves. If it weren't for us, the vermin would eat us. Dora is a strong woman, one like any of us. Her daughters grew up here, and they'll be like our daughters and granddaughters. There's no difference.
One of the aspects which it has been hardest for Dora to assimilate is the constant supernatural explanations which the Bijagos give for anything that happens.
Quando cheguei à Guiné, eu tinha fé, tinha certo receio.
When I came to Guinea, I had faith and a certain distrust of the unknown. Today, I see the rituals they perform, and although I know they don't exist, they have such faith and hope with such strength that they achieve it. But the things they want are easy to get. Normally, they don't ask for impossible things. They ask for things which are easy to achieve.
But this doesn't only happen in spiritual matters. What has been most difficult for Dora to understand is their different view of life and death.
When I arrived, I lived next to a maternity hospital. A maternity hospital in a Catholic mission. And what really made an impression on me were the women who left the hospital with a dead baby and didn't cry. I cried, and they didn't cry. Now I understand that, because they can't do anything. They are very limited. Another time, I met a woman who asked for my little girl's clothes for her daughters. She had a 5-year-old girl. I came back a week later and asked her about her daughter. She died, she told me, but she said it as if it were nothing out of the ordinary. How did she die? I asked. She died. Didn't you take her to the hospital? No, I couldn't. Why? Because I didn't have the money to kill a goat. She needed the permission of their God to be able to use the whites' hospital. They can't use the white people's magic without asking for permission. And she preferred to let the child die rather than have somebody else in the family die. Because if she took her son to the hospital, and her son was cured because he went to the hospital, another person in her family would die in his place. After living in Portugal and coming here to Guinea and seeing the misery, people's difficulties, the warmth of the people, I know that here there is a greater human warmth than in Europe. My dream is always changing, because today I want one thing, tomorrow another, because life is always changing.